You've stumbled across the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and I started this podcast over 2 years ago as a way of networking with people in the industry. Today's chat is with Dan Elder, a 15-year veteran of animation who currently co-heads the effects department of Jam-Filled Entertainment. Dan specializes in creating insane 2D smoke, fire, water, mud, bubble, wind, light, firework, laser, and pretty much any other effect you can think of. In our chat, he's going to talk about how to specifically pursue 2D effects as a career, but also important areas like how to ask for a raise in your next contract, or the type of mindset you should develop to become successful in your role. But first, this episode is sponsored by the awesome team at startastudio.com. Startastudio is a new online school focused on the business side of animation. They have both free and paid courses, an online community, and downloads to help you succeed in your animation career and build your own cool, creative, and viable animation studio. You can use the unique discount code AIP, as in Animation Industry Podcast, in their checkout to save 20% on their popular Pro Studio Startup course. So whether you're looking to up your freelance game or plan and launch your own animation company, check out startastudio.com. Now let's jump into the chat. Hey Dan, what's happening? How's it going?
Not much. I'm happy to be here, man.
Excellent. How's COVID treating you? What's where you're located? Where you're heading to? What's going on?
So I'm headed nowhere.
Okay.
for obvious reasons. I mean, I don't think we're in lockdown, but I'm located in Ottawa, the Ottawa animation scene, and the studio I'm at, we are all on work from home.
Yeah.
Discussing the possibility of maybe a couple employees here and there going back, but for now, that is just sort of on the table.
Cool. What studio is that, if I may be so bold?
Yeah, no worries. So I am co-head of the effects department for Jam-Filled. We have studios in Ottawa, Toronto, and just started a new one in Halifax. So I help to oversee the productions going on in those studios, along with just trying to do scenes and my own, still contributing as an artist and not just being like a manager, you know.
What is the most fun show to do effects on? I'm assuming it's Final Space because of all the laser beams and universe stuff, or am I wrong? Is it like a kid's show?
No, you're not wrong. You're definitely in the correct vein. My opinion about sort of Eastern style animation versus Western style animation is that Western style, we don't yet take effects as seriously as they do sort of in the anime world.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for the coolest effects stuff, you're looking at some kind of anime. But over here, yeah, anything that is more effects oriented, like the last show that I just got done running was a show called Superhero Girls, which was created, it was a reboot with Lauren Faust, the creator of Powerpuff Girls, and that was a very heavily effects orientated show. So there was tons of fun stuff to do in there.
Nice.
It was tough, but it was really, really good. Yeah.
Sweet. So effects is like kind of one of the last hand-drawn art forms in 2D animation almost, because everything seems to be rigged. So I want to hear your journey of how you got into it. Did you just wake up one day and you're like, I want to do effects? Or like, how did this happen for you?
My origin story is yeah. It's sort of both sweet and sour. I had a couple moments in my career where I feel I'm not really a big sort of hippie person, but I kind of feel like the universe was pointing me in the effects direction, and I didn't quite listen as soon as I should have. So my schooling was done in Saskatchewan at a private art school called Red House, which is unfortunately now closed. But like most people coming out of school, I wanted to be a character animator. I think that's like probably the most common sort of career path that most like fresh animators go on. So unfortunately, as one I'm sure could imagine, Saskatchewan isn't really a super hotbed for animation. There at the time,
like the hotbed for wheat.
Yeah, and canola. Yeah,
Canola.
yeah. At the time, there was a couple stop motion productions going on.
Yeah.
But I had a friend who was a year ahead of me, and he left to go out to the East Coast. Anyone who's familiar with Canadian animation would possibly know that in the early 2000s, the East Coast was a hotbed for animation, not just Halifax, but there was a studio in PEI, the capital. I always mess it up. Charlottetown.
Charlottetown.
Anyways, the capital of PEI. There's a studio there, and I landed in a studio in New Brunswick in Miramichi called Fat Cat. And part of the reason why I wanted to go there was because they were doing the first TV length animation for a show that I really loved that was web series based for a long time called Happy Tree Friends.
Hey, what up?
Yeah. Old school Flash animation stuff right there. So I was learning a lot because everything I had learned had been traditional through schooling and stuff. And now we're trying to do Flash, working strictly on a computer, working on a tablet was a little bit of a shock to me. And the first time I sort of had the universe nudging me in the direction of effects was the studio, unfortunately, wasn't as organized as most studios should be. And the reason why effects is a department is because when you have shows that have a lot of effects in them, just like any other department, they need to be overseen. There needs to be someone in charge to drive the look and the style of the show, to check hookups, to make sure that everything works, right?
Yeah.
Effects as a department didn't exist at this studio, which was fine for a couple episodes. The idea was if you got handed a scene with effects in it, you animated it, everything. It wasn't an issue until we got a episode which had a ton of fire in it. Now, obviously, if you're going to do fire, you want the fire looking exactly the same from shot to shot to shot, right? So when we got the rough cut of this episode done, it had, I don't know, 15 or 20 people, like the animators, who had fire in their scenes, all animating fire in their own special, unique sort of way, right?
Man, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
You'd think somebody would have had the premonition to reach out to everybody and be like, hey, here's the fire files or the way you should animate it.
We need to standardize this. We need someone to oversee it, we need the department, basically, right? And there wasn't any of that. And I think it sort of got, in terms of deadline, it got so late. It's like, we're better off sending something than sending nothing. So obviously is it Mondo Media, I believe? They saw the show and they're like, we need the fire to look all exactly the same. This is the scene with the fire we like the most. And that was my scene.
No
right?
way.
Yeah. So wow. we got the client notes back saying like, we want the entire show to look like this fire. so I had a couple of the sort of higher ups, the animation director and stuff, approach me saying like, listen, you basically have to do the fire for the rest of this episode. Like, we need you to revise everyone's scenes that had fire and put your fire in there because the client liked your fire and they want the fire in there. So I did it, which was great, and sort of a moment that I'm pretty proud of. In retrospect, though, I mean, like hindsight, I wish I would have taken it as a sign. I didn't. I did the revisions and stuff, and it's like, okay, back to character animation. Let's keep going. Let's keep, trying to get better at this. When I should have just been like, if I was super aware of what was going on, I would have gone to the studio head and pitched them the idea of an effects department, and slotted myself in there as the head of it right away, But this was my very first job. I think I was like 6 months or so into it. So I didn't really have the wherewithal to come up with sort of like business strategies like that. So I unfortunately at that point ignored it. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Fate was literally like knocking on your forehead, being like, hey, here's your path. You should take it. It's a great opportunity. So, okay, well, you stumbled into effects. How do people get into effects these days? Because like, for instance, I'm going to Sheridan College, and it's a very renowned school for animation, and all the grads go and work in Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, the world, etc. But there's not a heavy focus on effects. Like, for instance, it's heavily focusing on acting performance and lip sync and stuff like that. And for instance, last year we did, we could choose a water droplet or like in a bucket, or a fire, a flame of a candle. Like effects are very short. So what is a path that people are taking nowadays to get into effects that you see? Is there a streamlined path of like, people taking an online course in effects, getting together an effects portfolio, applying for an effects position, or like, how does that happen?
So the sort of the nitty gritty of it is that if you are currently in school and you want to get into effects, you have to be a really self-motivated person and learner, because it is going to, from all the schools that I know, it's going to require you going to your teachers and saying, I have decided this is my direction. I'm paying for the school. I want help getting into my job in the industry with effects. Obviously, there's no class here. How can I make this happen? There are online classes, which once again, you're going to have to be self-motivated. You're going to have to seek them out. You're going to have to write the emails, talk to the people, stuff like that. However, because the department itself, first off, is quite small, like the studio I'm in, over the 3 different studios that we have, I think we're pushing like 600 or so employees, but that's everyone. The Ottawa location specifically, which is where I'm located, is, I think, briefly north of 200 employees, of which the 2D effects department is between 8 and 10 people.
Gotcha. Like 4% of your office, 1% of the entire company.
Yeah. So because of this, we are quite closely, we're tight knit, but that means that we are very open to helping people on an individual basis.
Gotcha.
So at this point in time, even though what we want is students fresh out of school coming to us with their reels, either asking, how do I get better, or how do I get a job? But currently, sort of, I would say the best foot in the door right now is just get a position at a studio, then talk to the effects department, talk to the people who are in charge, talk about how you can go about starting to animate and creating work that will impress people enough to be like, yes, let's take you on as a junior animator.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, because like same with kind of stop motion where it's a little bit more of a niche, it's harder to find training in that, but once you're in, it's like everybody knows you. So
Yeah,
the market in that case for special effects, is there a high demand for people in special effects then?
super
Or
high.
is it kind of
No,
like
no,
the demand is met by just
no.
getting in?
No, it's super high. We have been
Interesting.
actively hiring for at least over a year, constantly looking for specifically the talent, but totally, we're not going to turn away someone if they show promise.
Gotcha.
And I have a bunch of friends who are all in effects, and all I hear about from studio to studio to studio is it's impossible to find you guys. It's impossible to track you down, especially the talented ones that might have experience running a department or running a show. Um, right now, the power is in the employees' hands in
Gotcha.
terms of this department. Yeah.
So let me run this by you. Say, it sounds like you kind of have to self-identify that you want to do effects and take it really seriously. Like if you're taking a general animation degree or whatnot, then you probably will have to stumble into it later on in your career. So let me run this by you. Say I identify that I love effects. I do my hobby is effects, and I want to take this seriously. So I take some online training. I try to put together my best reel of like different effects and things that you might see for a show. And I get in touch with people like you. So I'm in constant contact with what's going on in the industry. You see my work. Would that be a good way to enter?
Oh, yeah. So one of the pieces of advice I give to students or people who are newer to the industry is, if you have made the decision of the department you want to gun for, when you create your demo reel, because I've done a lot of hiring, right? Like I look at demo reels not all the time, but quite frequently whenever someone applies to the studio and they mention in their email if they're interested in effects, their demo reel will come across my desk. And so one of the pieces of advice that I give is that if you are decided that effects is what you want to do, then gear your demo reel strictly to that department that you want to enter. As the person doing the hiring, and I don't know if this is going to sound a little bit harsh or not, but I don't care what your life drawing looks like. I don't care how talented you are at backgrounds. I want to see that you have a fundamental knowledge of effects, from the very basic stuff up as far as you're comfortable going. And as long as I can see that, then I can get a very good gauge of what I'm working with, and sort of the potential that you might hold. So as long as you come to me with that kind of demo reel, and with a little bit of talk about your passion for effects or how you got into it, we are pretty friendly and open about, at the very least, trying to get you into the department in some form or fashion anywhere. Not it doesn't necessarily even have to be at the specific studio that I work at, but if you were to come to me just with a general passion for effects, I'll sit down, talk about effects, and help you out and try to get you into the department.
Nice. That sounds really encouraging, because what I'm hearing is, the typical way of applying for a job is to apply to the applications at whatever studio.com or like talk to a hiring manager. But it almost sounds like if with this niche specifically, it makes more sense to get to know the people in the studio kind of first before you even reach that step. Is that what you're saying?
If you have an in like that, that would be excellent.
Gotcha.
But I can tell you that if you apply to the studio and in your email you had an effects specific demo reel, and
Oh, I see. They were just
in the body it mentions effects, I don't want to say you'll get fast tracked, because it doesn't really work like that, but right away that application stands out, because the department is in need.
Gotcha.
So you are gearing yourself in order to try to fit a niche which lots of studios are in need of. So they're looking to snatch up fresh talent wherever they can.
Sweet. I have one more question before I switch topics completely.
That's fine. Yeah.
So as somebody who's been doing effects for a while, and you're the head of your department as well, what kind of person? Sorry, did I get that right?
No. I just want to put it out there that I'm co-head.
Co-head. Sorry.
Because I don't want my sort of partner in crime, Chris Graff, who's I'll give him a quick shout out, an amazingly talented effects artist, but we handle the department together. Yeah.
That's very nice of you to mention.
Yes.
We'll have to send this episode to him just for that. Sorry, now I need to backtrack. Oh, right. So what kind of person really excels in effects specifically? Like when you think of yourself and the skill set you have and what you really get out of making effects, like who's the perfect candidate to go into effects if you're like not sure and you love animation, you've done some effects or other things?
I would say someone who's still interested in drawing has to be the number one. When I train people, a lot of the difficulties I run into are people coming from a 3D background who are more heavily interested in trying to get the program to simulate effects. That is not what we are about. I'll give the caveat that my everyday 9-to-5 job in effects is primarily for TV animation, but it is also 2D effects. Right. So I want people that like to draw. I don't want people who are looking to use, we work specifically in Toon Boom Harmony, and it has a lot of great tools, and I'm actually a Toon Boom ambassador this year.
Nice.
For whatever that's worth. So I have nothing negative to say about the software, but when it comes down to creating effects for TV, I want people who can use the program in terms of drawing.
Makes sense.
So you should be interested in drawing. Obviously also animation. There's a certain aspect to effects which, and I think this might be what some people find quite intimidating, is that there's a pretty heavy sort of abstract element to effects animation, which I think a lot of people can sometimes struggle to try to comprehend, because the example I always use is if you're staring at a fire, like IRL, in real life, there's this very ethereal element to fire. It's not a solid, but it's visually present. So when you're animating fire, you have to go about it in a manner where you're asking yourself, how do I represent fire in sort of a 2D fashion? And with stuff like that, you're going to be talking about, I use this term maybe more often than I should, but like shape language, okay. The kinds of shapes you're using in the animation. You want to take into consideration like things like negative space, and the movement of the fire is obviously very, very important. And if you do it all right and correctly, you will have something that imitates real life, but in real life is very sort of ethereal and hard to grasp just by looking at like a picture of it, right? So having some sort of love for sort of the abstraction and the way nature works, I really like to see in possible employees, because when I'm teaching, whether it be like fresh employees or helping out a student or something like that, I try to take a very physical approach to the things that are going on with the effect itself. Like a really good example of that would be water. Water in and of itself isn't isn't really an effect, because when there's no energy present, water wants to stay still and flat and fill and like conform to gravity and fill the most sort of southern point of contact that it might have. Like you can think of it in terms of like a bowl, right? And the actual effects animation part, when it comes to something like water, doesn't come until you introduce energy to it. So the water itself is a substance, but what you're actually trying to animate is the energy in the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the examples I use is like, it's a really simple effect, but when you think about it, the water ripple, you are animating the highlight of the water, which is being caused by the energy moving through it, right? So that's kind of the approach I try to take when I'm thinking about what I'm trying to replicate in the animation and in the drawings.
I really like that you you mentioned kind of, you know, the heart of what you're trying to do, because I was thinking how in like character animation you study, or like storyboarding, you study life drawing and cinematography to try to improve on your craft. But with effects, like you kind of mentioned, the heart of it is nature itself. So are you studying, like, to get better at effects, do you study nature
Absolutely.
specifically? That's awesome. That sounds
Yeah.
really fun, actually, just to like, I'm like scroll frame by frame through.
So you might not necessarily like, there's a lot of tricks and stuff like that which you learn over time,
Yeah.
and you learn to incorporate in your work and the animation that can get you the best effects animation. In TV, I'm always the, if I had like sort of a catchphrase, my catchphrase would be, is the juice worth the squeeze? So in TV animation, you're always looking for the biggest bang for your buck, right? But if you were to sort of remove that to the side and you're just trying to get better at effects, there, if you're trying to start at a really basic level, exclude the animation, get rid of it, don't even think about it. Get really good real life subject matter, whether it be water, fire, smoke, whatever, and draw it. If you were trying to draw sort of like, say, a poofy smoke cloud from an explosion or like that, how are you going to represent those shapes? What are the shapes that you are seeing in it? How does the light fall on the shapes? What kind of shadows are you going to use to try to make this cloud of smoke feel, because at the end of the day, everything we do is 2D. So how are you going to best try to, in a 2D flat drawing, make this smoke cloud look 3D? And we're not, we sort of straddle a balance where we don't want to replicate things so they look identical to real life. We're trying to meet things halfway, where it's halfway realistic and halfway art. You know, those are the best effects. If you're really excited and jazzed about doing cool 3D effects, there are simulators out there. Like off the top of my head, I think the most popular one is called Houdini. Become a 3D effects artist. That's, if that's your passion and that's what you want to do, and you want to make real life looking stuff and work on live action movies and stuff, then absolutely, you know, follow what gets you jazzed in the morning. But we kind of need to need to meet it halfway when it comes to like cartoons and stuff.
Nice. I thought of another question because I just find this really intriguing. It's kind of related still. So I was just thinking how on a show, you know, a studio will get a contract to do a season of a show, and they'll hire a bunch of animators, and then that season will end, and then, you know, those animators' contract are up. With special effects, is it similar, or you know, I'm assuming you're doing like effects over multiple shows so I'm making a big guess here, but it would sound like a I guess if stable is the right word, but it's more of a long-term thing at a studio. Is that correct?
So to sing the praises of the studio that I'm at currently, Jam Filled, One of the things that they are really excellent with, and one of the reasons why I've been there for so long, I don't know, I've been there for like 8 or 9 years now, is that they're not, they're not interested in talent per project. If you are a good artist and you're interested in putting a lot of work into your craft and trying to become the best at what you do, they want to keep you around. So I do definitely know of a lot of studios where everything is contractual. You sign on for the season, and then once you're done, you're done.
Gotcha.
But the studio that I work at, even, there's obviously very, very busy times, and you pitch in a little bit extra. I'm not, I don't endorse, and I'm not a big fan of crunch at all. That's also sort of like a little bit of a balance. But when you really believe in sort of the mission that the studio you're involved with is trying to pursue, then that kind of studio should be willing and wanting to keep you around when things are also slow.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think that's amazing of Jamfield to do that. It sounds like a great place to be. So let's switch it up, because the reason I originally reached out to you is not to talk about 2D, even though we could do a whole episode on 2D effects. It's because of a comment that I saw you make about how to ask for a raise in animation when you're kind of fresh, and you know, you were spewing some advice for some greener people on how to go about doing that and knowing your worth and stuff. So I'm wondering, this is a big topic for me too, because you know, I'm in school right now. You know, I have a past career, but it was totally unrelated field of animation, where in animation your skill set is much different than, you know, what you're doing in business. But so without me going on any further, let's talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So okay, so how do you know your worth? You know, you're just, say that you're on your first contract at a studio, you're fresh out of school. You know, kind of the first contract you take because you need to get some experience, and you can't always negotiate. But say you've been working for a while, you've been doing some really good work, your supervisor's giving you great feedback, and then it comes time to ask for a raise. What is your, you know, how should I go about this? What's my first step in thinking?
So I want to make sure that I preface everything with just by quickly saying that this is like my opinion. This is how I approach things. This might not work well for everyone. The whole subject of knowing your worth is a very difficult one. I know a lot of people that deal with imposter syndrome, which is a very real thing. And I think if you experience it, if you experience it and you want to have a career in animation, you need to actively be doing whatever you can to sort of fight against it. The way that I have chosen to sort of go about it in my career is I take a little bit of a CBT approach. For people who might not know what that means, it's short for cognitive behavioral therapy. It's an evidence-based therapy for trying to deal with things like depression and anxiety, but I won't comment on that. But I've sort of co-opted it to try to apply it to an animation career. And one of the ways that it works for me is by really trying to focus on the actual evidence of what I have seen and experienced around me in my career, and not always necessarily listening to the little voice in my head that could possibly be telling me something like, you could have animated this better, no one's going to like this animation, that kind of stuff. Those kinds of thoughts and feelings can be valid, but I always want my thoughts and feelings to be backed up with some kind of evidence. So if I'm looking around me and I am seeing people who are constantly talking positive about my work, I am hearing feedback from clients who are saying that they've seen the effects in the show and they love it. I'm hearing from employees that I'm training that I give good advice and they are happy that they were able to be trained by me. These are all, first off, positive statements, but they are statements that are coming from a source that is like outside of you and what's going on inside of your head. So you have no other option except to hear these things and take them seriously. You don't necessarily have to 100% believe everything someone tells you, because there's definitely going to be people out there that might say some comments that might be a little bit more negative or might be a little bit more positive than they realistically should be. But what you're looking to do is to compile everything and sort of look at the mean, look at the trend of what is going on. So if you're constantly getting positive feedback, even though maybe the voice in your head is trying to talk negatively, you know that you immediately should be giving less worth to the voice in your head and probably believing more in what is being said from the people around you. Because if you're getting positive comments from several different sources that are unrelated, you know that that is a solid base of information that is sort of like not corrupted by anything else, right?
Yeah.
So after saying all of that, if you are in the position where you are hearing constant positive feedback, then you know that you have made yourself part of the pipeline and the company. You are integrated as a very positive force. Now you have to look at what it is that you bring to the table and consider sort of where you are at in terms of compensation. Um, it is still in westernized society very taboo to talk about what you make. Maybe you have some other fellow employees or something in which you can be as open and honest about things as you need to be. But that's just another avenue for like basically gathering the information, right? But if you can draw the conclusion that you have sort of beyond a shadow of a doubt demonstrated a good positive force to the studio, you're hearing very little, if any, sort of negative influence or revisions, stuff like that, then you know that you're in a position to want to be compensated to the level that you deserve.
Right. Do you put anything like quotas in there? Like if your animation quota is like a minute every 2 weeks or something like that, and you're constantly meeting that ahead of time? Because what you're saying is it sounds it sounds like, well, it sounds like a great strategy to me. I really like what you're saying about the CBT and like, you know, I struggle with that too, because I feel like well, at least me going through life and doing art at the start when you suck, you know, people say nice things and you discount that because you know you suck, and then people say mean things and you take that to heart. And
Yeah.
then there's an evolution that happens in your art, but not kind of in my brain of taking the comments and appropriately filtering them to my skill level. But what you're saying about asking for a raise and collecting information, I mean, that's what I've done in the past in my other career. You know, you figure out all the responsibilities you're doing. You look at that level of responsibility versus positions at other companies. You do some research. You know, LinkedIn has a great tool where you can just type in your location and job and it'll spit out a salary. There's Glassdoor. You talk to other people at other companies, find out what they're making, and then you come with a proposal and you say, here's the level of work I'm doing. You know, here's all the expectations that I met. Here's the research I've done on what I'm actually worth. And if you don't pay me this, then you're actually discounting my worth as a position. So this is all lining up exactly with my experience too. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah. So this is kind of the point where I prefer to sort of play hardball. If I feel confident in my worth, I feel confident in what I know I want to ask for from a company. As much as I love the company that I'm at right now, and I'm super happy that they They seem to respect artists as at the standard or above that I want artists to be respected as.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, my message will always be that you have to be your best advocate. Now, what does that necessarily mean? That means that, once again, you have to know your own worth, which is a difficult concept in and of itself, but it also means that you can't take any crap. Where are we at in terms of like swearing? Is that
Say whatever you want. Say
okay?
Whatever the fuck you want.
Oh, okay. You
There you
dropped the
go.
F-bomb. Okay, cool. No holds barred then. Yeah. So as an artist, you shouldn't take any shit. This is difficult because if you are trying to value yourself and the work and what you bring to the studio, every studio is going to be different. Every studio is going to have a different set of expectations. In some studios, your talent level will be excellent and you will flourish, and you shouldn't feel bad or worry at all about asking to be paid what you feel your value is. Other studios, it might be a little bit more wishy-washy, and it's hard to sort of figure out where you settle, and you want to sort of maybe approach things a little bit more cautiously. But if you are going into a negotiation where you are expecting a certain outcome and the studio, for whatever reason, just flat out refuses to meet you there, you need to be able, once again, my opinion, you need to be able to make the career changes, even if they might be drastic ones, in order to make sure that you are valued for what it is that you bring.
Yeah.
So if a studio wants to play hardball, you really want to stay at the studio for whatever reason, that's your own prerogative. Then obviously you're going to want to go in with sort of a mentality that you're willing to negotiate, right? There is your best outcome, there's their best outcome, and then compromising, meeting somewhere in the middle, and you should be happy, right? But if you're trying to make advances in your career and the studio that you're currently at, for whatever reason, just isn't meeting you even halfway, it's my opinion, you need to make the changes that are going to affect your career and your position most positively in life. And a lot of times that can mean having to leave.
Yeah.
I have seen it so many times where someone isn't being valued at the level that they want. They have the courage and they know their worth. So they get in touch with another studio. Maybe it involves like a big move. I mean, it's not easy moving across the country or anything like that, but they leave, they go somewhere else. They collect experience from another place, and maybe that opportunity draws to an end or whatever. And when they come back, they might be in the same industry, in the same area, but suddenly that studio that wasn't willing to value them at what they wanted is now at the table, and they're now willing to play ball, you know? And that wouldn't have happened if that specific employee had just sat around and accepted the terms and conditions that the studio ultimately was dictating to them. Don't let a studio dictate to you your worth.
Totally.
You prove it, and then you dictate to them what it's going to take to keep you. So there's good studios out there. I'm proud to be a part of one, but at the end of the day, you are your own product, and you have to advocate for yourself harder than anyone else will.
In terms of what you just said about, valuing your worth, the studio saying no, you leaving, and then coming back after an extended period of time, whatever, with new skills. My first thought would be you kind of maybe burn the bridge a little bit with that studio by saying, hey, you're not going to give me what I want, goodbye. But do they actually see the value in how much of a good worker you are, and what they lost and what you gained? And
so
that's why they're back at the table?
Absolutely. Like, that's part of the sort of like hardball conundrum, right?
Yeah.
Is that you don't I don't advocate burning bridges. I really doubt many people out there would. Don't jump out of contracts, you know, like if you've signed a piece of paper saying you're going to fulfill a contract, do your best to fulfill it to the furthest extent that you possibly can. But I've seen a lot of people that are in this kind of situation and they leave. And initially the word, you know, around amongst the employees and stuff is like, ooh, this person did the studio dirty. This isn't good. You know,
Yeah.
they've totally burnt a bridge. 4 years later, it's like it never happened. 4 years later, they have the reputation and the experience, and they come back in, and it's water under the bridge. So it's a difficult scenario because it exists in both extremes. People where it seems like they have burnt a bridge, and people who it seems like they left on decent terms, but then for whatever reason, it was like, no, we're never going to work with this person again. It's not, when it comes to money, like it's not easy. It's not cut and clean. It'll take some, you know, it'll take some fuck ups and some mess ups in order to realize sort of how to do this stuff properly. But I do enough sort of freelance. I'm not strictly sort of a 9-to-5 studio animator. I do a lot of work on the side, and I've negotiated a lot of terms and contracts and stuff. And my opinions are just what I've picked up over the years of seeing other people get burnt, myself getting burnt.
Yeah.
And seeing things go positively, right? Like if you find yourself in a super awesome positive contract with great clients, what about it brought that positivity, and what can you do in order to replicate that in all your sort of future contracts and endeavors, right?
Yeah, I have a question kind of around your experience. So, you know, you've been around the block a few times. You just said you've negotiated a lot with freelance and stuff. And you also said it takes a lot of courage, which I know firsthand when you're first kind of green in the industry and you go to your manager and say, you know, it takes a lot because you expect rejection. You've never done this before. You don't talk to anybody because it's taboo to talk about these things.
Yeah.
How do you, like, for instance, my first experience doing that when I was fresh out of school, my manager was like, you could be flipping burgers, so you should be happy you make what you make. And I was like, oh, dang, all right, thanks. And that made me pretty disgruntled.
That's the reverse power move, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the reverse of you knowing your worth. That's the studio actively trying to beat you down and put you in your place so you don't ask these questions.
Right. So how do you make sure that meeting goes well? Like, what's the mentality you come in? Because you know, you've done your research, you've gained all this courage. You may get a rejection, you know, depending on this. And then what do you do after that? Like, you say you don't have an opportunity lined up, and you're just, you know, like, how do you make sure that you set yourself up to advocate for yourself so early on in your career? Because I agree, it took me a long time to figure that out too, and that comes with experience of failing and trying and figuring it out too, right? So
yeah,
what are some steps you can take earlier on? This is kind of a vague question.
No, not at all. The earlier you are on in your career, the tougher it's going to be, because for me, the huge sort of aspect is demonstrating your worth. If you haven't been around for very long, it's going to be harder to demonstrate that properly and efficiently, which is going to means you have less power sort of at the negotiating table. When you are taking on a contract, obviously things you have to consider are sort of the project. You know, lots of people are willing to take less and work harder for an IP, an intellectual property that they are super pumped and excited to work on. That's something that's going to weigh into your decision making. And those are sort of caveats that you might be willing to sort of relent upon in order to get involved in that project. For some people, it's just all about the money. And if it's about the money, then you have to make sure that you're demonstrating your worth better than anyone else out there. And if you're confident in that, then absolutely you can play more sort of hardball than the next guy. I was talking to a friend today who is negotiating a contract with a studio with an IP that he likes and he wants to potentially work on, but he didn't super, and I'll keep things vague, but he didn't super like sort of the terms that they were bringing to the table. So one of my other larger pieces of advice is that when you are negotiating, don't ever self-deprecate. Never. If you're talking about how you can help a client bring their project to sort of the next level and stuff like that, you always want to be talking about yourself. The way I think about it is, you always want to be talking about yourself like you know you're the shit.
Yeah.
But you're being humble about it.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, especially if you love an IP, you know you're going to be extra passionate about bringing that project to life better than, somebody who isn't passionate. So it would make sense they would want to pay you more as a better asset to the company.
Yeah. And I always, like I said earlier, I don't treat production managers or HR people the same way I treat creatives. I guess to a certain extent, I try to put on a little bit of a mask when I'm dealing with money and or contracts, stuff like that. I'm sorry if you can hear the dog in the background.
That's all right.
And I always try to be more open and empathetic when I'm dealing with creatives. I find those two sort of approaches have been the best when ultimately I'm just trying to get my way, right? Like, I'm trying to work on the coolest projects for the most money with the most sort of relaxed deadlines.
Yeah.
And these are just my approaches for trying to get my way in like as many instances as I possibly can. Now I've ate some shit in my time. Like, I've had some really, really bad contracts that I wish I wouldn't have taken. But the silver lining is always like, okay, well, what really messed up in these and how can I avoid it in the future? I'm not sure if that entirely answers the question.
It does. And I also have a follow-up question. You mentioned talking about yourself as the shit. And for me, I have a problem with that because I'm very new to my art career. I still feel very kind of vulnerable. And sometimes I come across as cocky when I don't intend to, because I just haven't learned the right way to talk about building myself up in this area that's so personal to me. So do you have some tips on how to talk about yourself as the shit in a humble way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. Like, that's the older I sort of get, the more I realize that everything is sort of about balance, So it's like being confident without being braggadocious.
Braggadocious.
Can be very, very
like
tough.
That's something Muffy Crosswire would say.
So I find probably if I had a strength, it's not necessarily like with in the moment talking. When I'm negotiating a contract or something like that, when I'm writing an email, I usually find I can do sort of my best work about being like super awesome on the down low, but there's definitely something to be said about like a client who believes in you, like a client who talks to you and feels your passion for a project, especially like if they're paying for it, they want to know that you're fucking on board, you know? So if you can, when it comes to freelance, it's tough because one of the largest things, and I talk about this with like a lot of sort of aspects, is you have your talent and ability, but you're also to a certain degree selling yourself. You need to sell yourself as someone who's capable of accomplishing what it is they want. And so selling yourself to the degree where you can get them to the table and basically sign contracts and agree to like a dollar amount and stuff like that. Your personality will get them there, and then it's time for your talent to take over. And then you have to prove it. And that can also be the scary part, right? Is like, especially if you have the imposter syndrome stuff. That's when I heavily lay into sort of the CBT stuff, where it's like, I negotiated an excellent price. I have them convinced that I'm the right person for this project. Now it's time to produce. I hate everything I'm animating. What am I doing with a stylus in my hand at this Wacom? Like, I should literally just like probably crawl in bed and die. But I'm looking at all the proof in my past about the people that said the positive things. And so if you can build yourself up to the point where it's like, no, listen, I didn't trick them. I believe in myself. I'm going to do the best I possibly can. And if that's not good enough, then I will learn a lesson and I'll try to take as much positivity from it as I can and move on. But in my experience, so far at least, and like knock on wood that it doesn't change, but that's always been enough, you know. I've never really shit the bed where a client is just like, you totally deceived us. Like there's never been that sort of situation. So I think a lot of times creatives are creatives for a reason and can sometimes ruminate and create negative disasters in their head that convinces them that if they fuck up this project, it's going to be the end of their career. People will talk and, you know, whatever. And it's very, very rarely, if ever, as bad as you think it will be.
Totally. And also, I feel like some of that thinking, at least for me personally, leads me to do, you know, the best work I can because I'm so scared of not performing.
I mean, whatever motivates you, right? Like,
fear.
Sometimes, like, when I've been training employees, one of the things I've learned over the years is that everyone, and this may seem obvious to some people, but everyone is different, right? So I've had people who thrive under negative sort of reinforcement, right? Like not negative to the point where I'm verbally abusing them or anything like that. Like never that level, but like if you're sitting down with someone, there's some people who really get motivated by saying like, listen, I know you're better than this. Why is this the best work that you think is going to be accepted into this project or whatever the situation may be? And then there's those other people who really need like the hand holding, like you're okay, we're going to get you through this, I'm going to help you, you know, you can always depend on me. So like, and I guess if I can extrapolate that a little bit further, it's not just employees, but that's contracts as well, right? That's clients, that's clients as well. So finding the client, like I'm doing this one project for this one client, and I get this really strong sort of vibe from them that in the meetings when I'm with them, that it's very important for them to feel heard, right? It's not so much like I'm giving directions, now you go do, but it's at the point where they need to know that on like a very deep level, you understand where they're coming from. So in terms of like dealing with people like that, like I'll take on a lot of sort of communication strategies like parroting, where they will say something and I will repeat it back to them to make sure that they know that I've heard what it is that they have said or asked for. And if they are that kind of person that needs that kind of attention, they will respond really well to that. And at the end of the project, they might have had such a positive experience with you that obviously the hope is that they come back in the future, right?
That's a really good tip too, because you know, part of freelance is just taking care of your clients, right? Like making sure that's like half of
so
what you
much
have to do.
Yeah. So like the really nice thing about being at a studio is like you're the talent. There's people above you that handle the clients.
Oh yeah.
You deal with the work, and your job is to A, hit deadlines first and foremost, and then B, to the best of your ability, make stuff in terms of, for me personally, effects. Make the effects as cool as possible, right? But freelance, yeah, you're everyone. You're your own PR person. You are your own HR person. You are your own producer. and you're the talent. So I mean, like freelance can be not kind at times.
Yeah, dang. I feel like you've given us some really, I say us, I guess the people listening, but I'm the only one listening right now. I feel like you've given me some really great tips on like how to think of yourself as an artist, especially when you're starting out and kind of figuring out your worth, and also dealing with imposter syndrome, which seems to plague most people in this industry as the artists.
Yeah.
And then, how to figure out what to put together to ask for a raise, how to ask that raise. Are there any things that you should say or do to keep that professionalism, or like, I don't know, throughout the whole process? Because, this can be a roller coaster emotional journey.
Yeah,
Go through all
it's
this.
yeah, it's definitely tough, and it depends a lot on the kind of person you are. But um, I mean, a couple things that pop in my head is never take rejection personally.
Yeah.
Um, believe um, believe only half of what you hear. No, what's that saying? Believe only half of what you see and like none of what you hear. I think something like that.
Don't
So
listen to this podcast because
yeah, kind of. I'm started shooting myself in the foot here. Trying to like be positive about advice and stuff like that. But specifically in the terms that I'm using it, I mean when people are using words instead of money,
yeah.
like um, we're thinking of paying you this much, and we really want you on the project. And
Just wait
um,
until next quarter.
yeah, yeah. Um, what else? What else kind of stuff? Never self-deprecate is a huge one. Even if that thing in your head is telling you like, um, you know, make a really quick joke about how you're actually secretly a terrible artist or something like that. Like just don't do it. Just don't do it.
That's such a common thing.
Oh, like so common. But if you're dealing with someone who controls the money,
Yeah.
um, it's going to be a factor, right?
Well,
Like it's going to be a consideration that they think about when they have to make a decision. Maybe it's down to like you and two other people. Um, One is supremely confident, and then they think of you, and it's like, he really talked like mad shit about his like own personal capabilities. Do we really
right.
want someone like that on the team interacting with other people? And that can be a huge factor as well.
Well, and like imagine you're renovating or like redoing your kitchen, and the like contractor you hired keeps being like, "Oh, we're terrible. We're not very good. Our last project fell through. Haha." Even though it's a joke, it's like, I'm investing my money in this. It better go well.
Yeah,
Like, I want this person who I'm not even sure.
yeah.
So
and
totally makes sense. If you're tempted, don't.
and that's a great sort of mental activity to do. Is And they do it sometimes. I mean, I think it's a little bit cliche to actually do it specifically in interviews where like the interviewer is like, let's flip the table and you interview me for the job. But it is a good mental activity to do, to put yourself in the position of control. If you were actually trying to consider like, who am I going to give whatever the project is $10,000 to in order to animate this section or whatever, what is the person that I'm looking for?
Yeah.
And then if you have to fake it, like fake it. And if you fail, then take a look at why you failed and adjust, and then move on. And I know it's all part of the reason why it's like, yeah, don't believe anything you hear is because I say this stuff, and it's way, way, way easier to hear it than to do it. But if you can get yourself into the practice of trying to do it, you'll be better in the long run. And that is sort of one thing I want to touch upon here, because I know it probably sounds like I've been giving like a lot of advice and stuff like this. And my main objective in the end is I just want to help artists and stuff like that have successful careers. But I do want to make it known that even though I've been doing this for like 15 years, my personal career didn't see significant success until about 3 or 4 years ago. So I spent 11 years making mistakes and grinding, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, all these kinds of things, until I feel like maybe in the last 2 years specifically, but maybe 4 or so, I've been able to dial it in and have a decent amount of success with freelance and studio work. And I'm finally in the, like, not necessarily the dream position, but I'm in a position I'm proud to be in, at a studio that I'm proud to be at. So the grind also has to be taken into consideration too, because it's not going to obviously come overnight. Even if you're capable of following all the advice to the T, like, it's going to take some time. So be patient with yourself, especially as an artist. You have to be so patient with yourself. And I'll just go on like a little bit, maybe of a ramble here, but I remember when I was younger and like sketching and stuff like that, I would get so angry that I would have the image in my head of what I wanted to put down on the paper, but the translation from head to hand to drawing was so disconjoined and not meeting, that I would get super angry, and like I would stab my sketchbooks with the pencil. Like, why can't I get like this image in my head onto the actual piece of paper? And the thing that I try to tell, and this applies to artists, but it can apply to a lot of people, is one of the things from like CBT. Well, maybe it's not necessarily CBT, but one of the techniques I've tried to develop to in order to just give myself like the space and the breathing room to be not awesome like at art, or to be terrible at something, is I try to, and this might sound like a little hippy dippy, but I try to take myself and imagine myself as like a small child, like my inner version of myself, and I take all those negative things that I want to say to myself and I want to pour like over myself, but then I try to imagine saying that to a small child, saying that to yourself as a small child, like, you're terrible at art, why are you doing this?
Yeah,
you suck. Why would you ever say something to someone like that, right?
no.
So what would you say instead?
My first reaction is to encourage them, you know.
You encourage them. So why aren't you encouraging yourself? You want to be an artist, you want to get into the industry. Don't, like, the worst thing you can possibly do is make yourself your own worst enemy. There's plenty of people out there that could be potential enemies for you. Don't start with yourself. You which comes back to like be your own advocate, you know, like, champion yourself. And it goes all the way down to that critical voice, even when you're sketching and drawing, man. Like, don't let the negativities overtake you.
I really like what you just said there. I haven't heard, you know, say that to yourself as a 5-year-old kid. I find that really impactful.
It's effective, right?
Yeah.
Like, you picture yourself
changing what I'm thinking of, like, when I feel down on my art.
Absolutely, man. Like, right away. Like, I've seen pictures of, like, and we all have, of us as like little cute chubby kids, and obviously we're doing this because when we were younger, most likely we enjoyed drawing and stuff, and like imagining an adult spewing hatred at that young innocent child just makes you want to be your own champion and like say, like, shut the fuck up, man. Encourage it.
Well, and I feel like at least for me, and I know others, the passion comes from that childlike state of, you know, playtime, of, you know, animation is just play, really. It's like entering childhood when time didn't exist. You had everything you wanted and you were making your own fun. And that's it for me. I also really like what you said about, you know, going through 11 years of trying and failing and reaching a good state. I think you should be really proud of yourself. That's awesome to hear.
I am. Thank you. And part of the reason why I really wanted to, like, I was excited to hear from you, because up until this point we didn't know each other or anything like that. is because if anything I have learned or known over my career can help out anyone, I want to push that, you know, like, I want to collect as much fucking karma as I possibly can, you know.
Just have a giant bag of karma. Well, no, I really think this is going to help a lot of people. It's helping me. I mean, part of what I love about this podcast is all the issues you talked about. You know, I was in my own head for my whole career in business, being like, I can never be an animator. There's no way. I like built up a mental wall that I just wasn't even willing to take one brick off of to open that up. And now that I have opened up, I have to deal with all of these kind of intrusive negative thoughts that I've had for a whole decade, and trying to find a place for them to not be in what I'm pursuing, I guess.
Yeah. And like, at least in my experience, they're never going to stop coming.
Yeah.
You know?
But talking with people like you who, you know, you've made a career out of this, and you've figured out strategies and things that have worked. It's extremely helpful for me.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. I was going to say something and I lost the thought.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to say was that just a little bit earlier there, when we were talking about like the little kid stuff, and I don't specifically want to get into this now, but I mean, when you were talking about losing time and getting into your drawings and animation and stuff like that, I'm sure we could go on for like this specific point for like an hour, but the importance of like reaching that flow state.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I think I've talked to so many artists, obviously more specifically animators, but just artists in general, who all have this collective experience of the exact opposite of what I was talking about when I'm stabbing my sketchbook, the exact opposite of that, where you reach that state and that peace of mind, and it's almost like you're not making the decisions, it's just flowing out of you.
Yeah.
And I feel like children are so excellent at just immediately getting there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you put a piece of paper and a marker down in front of them and it's like, boom, they're there. And like, as we get older, we're constantly struggling, trying to like get to that place and spend time in there. But
well, it's almost like you reach an age, I guess it's what you call an adult, where your mind there's so many things on it. There's your rent, there's your bills, there's what are you going to make for dinner, all these decisions that are constantly bombarding you. And for me, like with stop motion specifically, you know, you have a character you're working on, you're like trying to get into it, figure out how it's moving. And there's a certain point where you've figured out how the character moves in this shot. Like everything else, all the background noise of everything else is lost. And you're just totally in moving this character and bringing it to life in the way that it is kind of meant to be as a puppet. And for me, like reaching that state, literally 6 hours will go by and I wouldn't have thought about going to the bathroom or eating or anything else, except maybe now my back is hurting and my feet are sore. But it's an incredible state. I don't know how to describe it. It's just like you become nothing almost. And then at the end, you look at something and I feel immensely proud that, you know, I was able to create this thing that came out of this flow state that you described. And it's awesome to me. So yeah. Do you have kind of an ultimate goal of what you want out of your career, life, whatever you want to call it, with what you're pursuing? Is there, because you mentioned, you know, you grinded for 11 years, you've reached a great state now. Is there a next level that you'd like to get to?
So the difficult thing with effects is that the pinnacles you can reach for effects is like your body of work and not necessarily position, right? Because I'm co-head of like a very large department for a very large studio, and I'm proud of that. But I'm kind of at the roof in terms of studio life.
Gotcha.
So one of the goals I had set a couple of years ago was, and I'm always trying to do this, and I'm not the greatest at it. I'm trying to get better. I know tons of people that are way better than me at it. But another goal was trying to get your work out there, which, whether you like it or not, means having a presence on social media, which I keep as professional as I can. I don't like to put a lot of personal. Some people mix it and get great success out of it. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying this is my personal opinion. One of the other things I wanted to do was reach a specific dollar amount for the amount that I was able to bring in over the course of a year. And right now, I would say if I had a dream, if we were to go to sort of like dream level of accomplishment, is one of the things that I love and adore about Eastern animation and anime, especially when it comes to effects, is that effects isn't an afterthought in that industry.
Right.
If effects there is treated as seriously and as intensely as any sort of character animation is. And when people are boarding and creating shows, things like fight sequences and battles and stuff like that, we can bring something to the table that you can't get. Well, I guess nowadays you can sort of get it with 3D, but you can't typically get out of live action, which is doing like really cool it feels like reality, but ultimately like it's fantastical kind of stuff, right? So I'm not hugely versed in this, but I know when it comes to certain kinds of animes, there's this concept of like a Sakuga Animator. Okay. Which is like an animator who has enough experience and enough talent that they will be tasked with handling like an entire sequence, whether it be like a battle sequence or something like that. But it is their vision and their dream put into like an episode of a show. And right now, with Western animation and the stuff that I have been working on, it's kind of creeping in there, but it's not there to the degree that I want it. That being said, I do have a very excellent example of a show that is pretty much doing it. First off, like Avatar was freaking amazing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a little bit like even old school now, like Jesus, that's got to be like 10 or
2000s, I think.
Yeah. So I had a very small hand in doing effects with a show called Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is done through Nickelodeon, through a service studio called Flying Bark in Australia. The lead effects artist there is a guy named Jeff Lai, who I feel very fortunate to have worked with, because he was able to open up my eyes to a lot of different techniques and stuff like that. But if you're able to get a hold of that show and you watch some of the battle sequences in that, freaking amazing. I've seen a couple of them come across my plate. Like I worked on season 1, which was cool, but season 2 like blew it out of the water. I have no idea how they're doing it. From the boards are super amazing. The animation is like fun and energetic and snappy. And then the effects in the battle sequences is just like next level. So that stuff is present sort of in my world, but it's not present in my studio, you know, and it's not my studio, but I mean like my department in the studio. I would really love that kind of level of effects work to be going on in Western animation, as well as the other places that it's in.
Nice. I that totally makes sense, and I like how you explained that whole concept to me, because I was largely unfamiliar with it. Is there anything else you wanna share, kind of as we wrap up this chat?
No, not specifically. I mean, we've touched upon a lot, and it's super nice to just sort of be able to ramble and talk about all these things. Like I get opportunities here and there with certain people, but it's not too often that you find people that are trying to take others' sort of ideas and concepts and give them a bit of a soapbox to get them out there to as many people as possible. So I definitely appreciate you having me here and letting me talk.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad that I can do that for you, because I've personally found this really insightful. I'm going to remember that child analogy probably forever. It's really stuck in my mind. So thank you for that. So yeah, and it's been great to have you. So just thank you for coming on the chat.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Cool. And if you're listening and you want to get in touch with Dan or reach out to him, which are the same thing, or follow his work, you can do so by heading on over to his website, which is elementalartist.net. And I'll include a link to that in the description of this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. And that's all for now. Okay, bye. The music for this podcast was composed by Will Farmer and the graphics by Daniel Abensauer. I encourage you to look them up if you enjoyed their work.